Thank you, everyone. My name is Oscar Ramirez. I'm the CEO and also co-founder of DGOLE. We are basically really happy to organize this webinar session to bring more understanding and explain our plans to basically related to our ecosystem and data infrastructure for economic development and open innovation, EcosystemOS. We have been really busy in the first quarter of this year to basically to bring the first products to reality to the market. And today we want to share with the global audience what we are going to roll out in the following months, specifically with potential customers that are now evaluating the solution. But assuming that also DGOLE and also EcosystemOS is very new for you, we also want to bring some kind of first introduction about a little bit about the company, so you can get also more context and some background information about us. So basically, we are a company based here in Helsinki. We are 4 co-founders, and we also have some other team members working remotely in different parts of the world, in specific different areas of the company that are helping us to build the EcosystemOS. And basically, we have been operating in this, I would say, field of innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem for over a decade. The history of our company is like that. So we started in 2009 operating as a startup commons, providing mainly services around training and consulting for those actors that are supporting directly or indirectly innovation and entrepreneurship. We brought them the core components or the fundamentals around ecosystem development. We provide them with all kind of consulting activities related to implementing new funding instruments, new programs, specific KPIs to measure ecosystem performance, and so forth. We have also released a lot of that knowledge based on that experience on the open source license, and at the same time, we kept an eye looking at how to bring more efficiency to that process of ecosystem development, and we have been always looking at how technology can bring more efficiency to that process. So we basically did a lot of that kind of piloting and MVPs development from the very beginning, I would say from 2013. And we have been learning and iterating all along the way to the point where we are today, and basically providing and putting more focus and energy on building digital solutions and data-driven approaches for ecosystem management and ecosystem orchestration in general. And this is basically where we are now. We are trying to bring solutions to connect ecosystem actors, to connect IT systems, platforms, data, and build ecosystem interoperability for the benefit of all the actors within the innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem, not only for entrepreneurs and startups or SMEs, but also for investors, for any supporting organizations, for economic development, etc. So definitely we want to position right now the company more as a provider of data plumbing services for the innovation and entrepreneurship industry. Also, related to the topic that we are discussing today, I think it's important to bring some kind of additional context about why we are developing EcosystemOS, and that kind of experience that we have got along the years. So we have like a good understanding about how ecosystem works from two dimensions, from non-technical perspective, but also from a digital or technology perspective. So from a non-technical perspective, and this is something that is, I would say, globally validated all around the world through a lot of reports and research and studies. So basically, this is what is happening right now. Basically, entrepreneurs are experiencing a lot of barriers when they are navigating the whole innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem in search of resources, in search of new programs, services, etc. They have lack of access to that information. Basically, that information is really hard to find, and maybe the information is not updated, is inconsistent, and definitely is not tailored to the entrepreneur's needs. And then as a result, so basically entrepreneurs don't get what they need at the moment when they need it. So there is a lot of frustration in that side, but at the same time, there is also a lot of frustration from those actors that have to look after the conditions of the whole innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. And that is happening because in this kind of multiplayer environment, the ecosystem data is scattered across many actors, many systems, databases, which is very difficult for those actors to basically to get access and manage and analyze what's happening at ecosystem level. So basically, there is like a really poor quality of data. So the information is outdated or is duplicated. There are some inconsistencies between the data coming from different sources. It is very cost basically to maintain that data. The information is not really easy to integrate with other systems. And basically, and that also brings the kind of perspective about that there is a lot of ecosystem silos or ecosystem fragmentation. And without that clear picture, then it's really hard to basically to move and adapt to the moving conditions that is happening at ecosystem level. On the other side, from a technology perspective, and this is based on our own assessment, basically evaluating different applications coming from different ecosystems and also taking part in multiple tenders and similar. So basically, the technology is seen basically through the lens of how the users interact with the applications. And they are fully missing what's behind that application. So they are missing fully the importance of data, how data should be converted into a key asset to basically to bring more understanding about what's happening within the ecosystem. So basically, if looking at that, at managing or orchestrating the ecosystem from the lens of the user interaction with those applications, that leads into implementing basically very old approach when it comes to technological architecture to be applied for ecosystem development. They normally tend to focus more on features instead of, for example, quality of data that can be collected for analysis, etc. There is too little around how data should be governed and how basically should define the rules to get data ownership for each of the ecosystem actors. Then also we don't see too much anything around how solutions at ecosystem level should be more interoperable, and that basically leads into providing really bad user experience mainly for entrepreneurs that are very hard for them to get the resources, the programs, the mentors, the investments, the services that they need to move forward in the journey. And eventually, this will contribute basically to add like another ecosystem silos and contributing to that, again, to that ecosystem fragmentation. On top of that, it's also really important to understand also the disruption of data and AI to the different industries or verticals. That also applies to the industry of the innovation entrepreneurship ecosystem. Some more data, more automation, more AI, more intelligence will be needed basically to drive innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem growth. And that will become like a really competitive advantage if you want to position your ecosystem as a front runner. And basically the conclusion that we are getting based on our global work with all kind of maturity ecosystems. So is that when it comes to data-driven innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystems, all countries, I would say, are developing countries. So it's like a kind of new opportunity for all cities, for all countries to basically to jump into this digital dimension, to start looking at ecosystem data as a key asset and use that data for the benefit of all the actors that are involved in this game. The kind of future vision that we are seeing is a vision like that. So basically we see like entrepreneurs will be able to interact with the whole ecosystem through a simple user interface in a natural language to basically to get response to the different questions that they have along the entrepreneurial journey. Also, instead of pushing the user or the entrepreneur to jump into a kind of a portal to find and navigate the different resources, we see that the information should automatically reach out to them to make it like the life easier for them. And definitely the information should be tailored to each of the ecosystem users' profiles. And in that sense, each actor should have like its own window to the ecosystem, getting the information that they need. And then on the economic development agency side, so basically it's important that considering that the data that they are managing is the digital economy of a city, of a region, or of a country, they should definitely be in control of its ecosystem data. They should be equipped to collect information, to analyze and share that ecosystem data with all kind of actors. They should be able also to capture interactions happening in the offline world, which can give them like really valuable insights that will help to the decision-making process and to plan and to allocate resources for different purposes. And definitely with more volume of data and with more quality of data to basically to unlock the power of AI, basically to bring more automation, to bring more matching between any ecosystem items. So this is the reality that we are seeing, and in order to reach to that vision, so ecosystems in general should be operated very differently. And basically, we should make a transition to basically to jump from this analog ecosystem way to operate the ecosystem where there are a lot of silos and information is fragmented and there's no common terminology between the different actors. So to move from this scenario to a digital ecosystem DNA, where basically you centralize information that is reliable and accurate for all the different ecosystem actors, and then for each of them to provide them with its own window so they can make better decisions regardless of their profile within the ecosystem. And the infrastructure that we need to basically to set up for that is basically this kind of ecosystem data repository, and to also set up a kind of legal entity that can take responsibility for basically making sure that there is enough long-term perspective to drive this in the future. And also a technological architecture that is able to also to collect and to unlock the data that is more on the private side. So therefore, there should be a clear focus on basically moving from this common user perception of what is the digital economies to basically to look more into the back-end side, to look more at the technology architecture, to understand more how data should be structured, how data should be managed, how to build APIs, how to build integrations, and so forth. To basically to understand that there's no magic in with this approach. So there is like a front end that is connected with the back end and bring more clarity about what is needed to basically to unlock this kind of a scenario for the future. And the kind of requirements that we see for this kind of solution basically is we have summarized it in this slide. So basically we think that there should be a modular architecture, so meaning that the front end and the back end solution should be separated to enable more flexibility, to enable more scalability, to be easier for maintenance and updates, and to also to be able to embed also the logic of the ecosystem into the data modeling. It should be user-centric design to make the life easier for every single actor within the ecosystem and simplify processes for them to get access to resources, etc. Another requirement should be to put in place a data repository that basically serves as a centralized and reliable source of high quality, timely, and accurate information, so that any ecosystem actor basically can trust on that and make informed decisions based on that data. It should also be easier to integrate with all kind of multiple systems or databases or applications that are already in place within the ecosystem. Also understanding that an entrepreneur is also operating globally in many ways, like when they are looking for co-founders or team members or investments or mentors. So it goes beyond their own territory. So then there should be also global alignment with other ecosystems to also to facilitate the exchange of information between different ecosystems. Also, it should focus more on providing efficient data management and automation to basically to be able to collect information and utilize that information for different purposes, and then use existing technologies like AI, machine learning, whatever, to basically to maximize the opportunities for everyone. And definitely thinking about that these kind of solutions are more focused on being adopted by economic development agencies. So transparency, collaboration, this kind of principles should be also embedded through the use of open standards and open source tools. So this is basically the kind of requirements and principles we are basing the development of EcosystemOS and basically I'm now passing the floor to my co-founder, Bartol Loikanen, who is also with us, so he can also continue with the session, bringing the building blocks and how to initiate the implementation of this kind of data infrastructure. Bartol, it's all you.
Thank you, Oscar. And hi everyone from my side as well. Let me just get the presentation also shared here.
Continuing on the topic and going more into the EcosystemOS, the approach, the solution that we have for managing and taking on the problem space and going into the solution. Basically, the key aspect is the focus behind the user interface. So all those things that make the applications work and information flow, and ultimately creates that experience for users in the ecosystem, being that entrepreneurs or otherwise. So it all is really about the data infrastructure. So how to make the data or information flow from application to application. So not only to be able to work with information and data that sits in any single application or service. So key for that is, first, there has to be open standard, or there has to be common data models. So for example, if I say a first name, last name, then that first name, last name should be recognized by the other application, that it is the same information. So that's very much the data model. And then instead of trying to connect these applications from one to another, so the more applications you have, so let's say Eventbrite and something like LinkedIn to CRM and so forth, it basically, to get the data to move and information to move between these applications, the right approach is to have like a central information repository, so data repository, where every one of those applications that are moving this data or information, they are sharing it through that one repository instead of trying to share it directly between the applications themselves. So that's really the key of the data infrastructure, is to make it possible and scalable to connect any number of applications to make the information flow between them. Because connecting directly between applications doesn't really work. So this is the essence of the data infrastructure, and enabling the interoperability and information sharing between applications directly, so that the data and information can be taken to where users already are, instead of trying to create like a portal where one portal is trying to cater for all kinds of different users and actors with the same interface. So then the interoperable applications are really these applications or application modules or services that are created for different use cases, like mentoring portal, funding portal, or CRM application, or event registration system, or just the websites and the information that are provided in the website directories or whatnot. So to get the information and data into use from these applications, and to get that information distributable between different applications, that is where the underlying data infrastructure really comes into play. And the central piece of that data infrastructure is really the data repository, because otherwise it's possible to get the solution to work in an efficient and scalable way, while maintaining the quality of the data and information being shared. Another key aspect for when we can technically establish this data repository and infrastructure as the single source of truth that information is shared to and information is retrieved, to different applications. It also requires someone to take the responsibility of the quality of that data, the privacy aspect of that data, terms and conditions of how that data is received and how it is shared, what data can be shared to whom, and so forth. And this legal structure is something that needs to be established along the way. And basically, it is impossible to create like a, or let's say anyone to take responsibility of the ecosystem data if there is no legal entity defined to whom that responsibility should exist on, and who is the party that terms and conditions or agreements are made with. So that's a key piece of enabling the data sharing is actually also, in addition to that technical architecture solution, is to have the legal side, the legal entity that these data sharing agreements can be made with. And the data repository is basically to use to take full control of the data, being able to store and organize, manage, and share this data to enable this single source of truth, a trusted source that everyone in the ecosystem can rely on. So if there is no such approach taken, basically it means that nobody is responsible of no data that is shared for common use or that is distributed to many stakeholders. And in a simple example, we can all know that if we have a team and there's no team lead or there's no one responsible, then basically, well, if everyone's responsible, then it means that nobody is responsible. So it really needs that type of approach and technical data repository level and then legal aspect. And when we're talking about this data repository, we mean this piece here in the center that anyone can just connect directly. And it means that anyone who is connected to this data repository technically, so anyone meaning application or service, then can share data to that repository and retrieve data from that repository. And that how this can be architected in the proper infrastructure and have the terms and conditions applied to it to be able to get the quality of data to exist and also have the data available and then also make it shareable with right access rights and so forth. And if trying to do that between applications only without the repository, it basically becomes very unscalable and impossible to manage and inefficient, and the quality of information and data will suffer significantly because there's so many different connections needed and different level of agreements created and then between multiple parties and so forth. So it needs to be centralized in a way. And basically, when we talk about the ecosystem data, of course, the ecosystem data can vary from very simple information like list of available ecosystem services and organizations to list of interesting events catered for ecosystems, available funding programs, and ultimately to existing investors, entrepreneurs, mentors, so people profiles, service information profiles, event organizers, events, and so forth. So ecosystem data depends on, it's easier to think from the lens of individual use case. So if we think what is relevant information when applying grant funding, for example, then it's of course all the business plan, financial information about the founders. And then on the other side, what are the funding criteria, when the funding is available, how is the funding process handled, and so forth. Or we can take just an event as a simple public information. It's what is the event about, who is it for, how long it is, when does it happen, and so forth. And all of that information is constantly something that someone is looking for and someone is trying to distribute to right audiences. But if it's not properly managed, it basically becomes very random who it will reach and to whom is it relevant, and so forth. And then to really make this all this work, the key piece is this open standard data model. So basically it means defining an information template for the system of what information we can share with others and what each of the pieces of information that we are sharing actually means. So we have systems separately available for this. Basically, this it's like a GitHub for open data model. It's basically a documentation of all of the different data or information fields that exist in the repository, and what is the meaning of that field, what type of information can be stored or shared with that model. And then the connections of understanding better of the meanings of that. But this is system of managing the open standard data model in such a way that it's can be scalably applied to different applications and repository. Equally, to not only make the data shareable in technical sense in the local ecosystems, but also across ecosystems. Data sharing agreements, of course, is also something that can be made in a very templated format. So depending on the use case and scenario of the sharing, then these types of agreements for what information can be shared and who can access that information and how that information can be used when connecting these systems and making that information available through different applications to their existing users. And it's equally for governance models, how to maintain the data repository and how is updates and versioning done for that, who is the responsible parties, how are the agreements done, and so forth. One of the key aspects also to get the infrastructure to be smarter is this concept of data on customer side, specifically referring to individuals and entities, most importantly startups and SMEs as entities. So of course it's very important that this information like business plan, pitch decks and so forth basically sits on the customer side, but it should still be in an application or a system that can also share that and make that data portable for where it needs to go. So if it only exists in a non-shareable format or as a PDF document, and that is not really maintained up to date, or it only sits in the receiving end in the, let's say, funding portals and so forth, it's a key aspect to make this data on customer side to work as well. So on the applications, if we look, we have open source applications on our side, so no vendor lock worries, can be freely developed further. Also Orchestra, which is basically to help organize existing support service organization information and services information using our startup development phases framework. Basically, it gets to organizing the different organizations and their services to see into what development phases of startups these cater for, to what phases those are relevant and whether they are serving market side, needs, organization side needs, or markets and organizations knowledge development. The Wisdom AI is another application, and basically this caters if you have used something like ChatGPT as a similar approach, but instead of that information that is used to answer actually comes from the data repository, some factual information, data and knowledge from your ecosystem that is provided and made available in the ecosystem. So it means that the answers that it gives can be trusted as much as the information that it's provided through the repository can be trusted. And this is a very scalable and effective way of sharing knowledge and information to any stakeholders in the ecosystem. But it is only as good as the information, factual information provided and made available to it for it to be able to answer those questions. So here's a simple demo interface showcasing just asking questions and the Wisdom basically answering based on the data repository information that is provided to it, and the questions can be coming from any type of ecosystem actor about anything about the ecosystem, and then the ability to answer and the quality of answer depends on what information has been made available for it to use to make these replies. Skyview application is a way for a specifically ecosystem operator, orchestrator, or economic development agency to be able to see what is happening in this data infrastructure and what type of interactions are happening, to get analytical perspective and more statistical perspective to KPIs and so forth, to really see what's happening in the ecosystem. And then, for example, it's possible to take action with the Wisdom to ask about what that means and what actions, for example, could be taken based on that to improve the conditions in the ecosystem. So in the roadmap aspect, basically how all of this works is to get it established, is to really get, without the repository, the problem continues to exist because everything is distributed and fragmented. Then the next step is to feed information to that repository, starting with the most important aspects that can be defined depending on your ecosystem conditions. And from there, when the interactions with the information starts, there starts to gain insights about what information is acquired, who is acquiring that, how are we currently responding to that based on the knowledge that we have. And then with that, the conditions can be easily improved by providing better information to be available, to get better answers. So when we look at the implementation phases, basically we have two dimensions where on one hand, we have the data quality level, and then there's also like a data sensitivity level, where in the very beginning, I recommend to start using with public, visible, like public data, public information that is already used and publicly available in the websites and descriptions of the services and so forth. And then on the other side, we have capabilities and also the liability. So the more we go into details of, let's say in the ultimate case, the social security numbers of the entrepreneurs that are required in the funding programs or banking, then those are highly sensitive information that comes with more liability. But each of these, both of these dimensions, the more quality and more detailed information there is, the more capabilities we can include into the applications, use cases, and AI. So as a starting plan for getting on with this, we basically have this matching plans for the roadmap, starting with Ecosystem 180, which focus specifically on that public data and getting organized and starting to process with very low risk and low liability aspect, to moving to increasing the next level of more private data, not yet too sensitive, but something that is shared more per permission. And then on the third level, we move more in the level of more sensitive things and taking more control and ownership locally in the ecosystem about the entire infrastructure. That also comes with more requirements of your available resources. And on the Ecosystem 180, basically all of this can be set up and get started as a software as a service approach. And ultimately, there should be a full handoff if maturing as a digital ecosystem to taking full ownership and control and liability of all the infrastructure for handling most sensitive data locally. So what we are seeing in our global perspective, as Oscar mentioned, as Startup Commons, we have been in this space for more than a decade, and basically the blue dots show where we have been on the ground doing ecosystem development consulting on the non-digital side, driving standards on the startup development phases and ecosystem development overall. And then on the pink, we have the areas where we are currently starting the digital aspect going forward. So this is kind of a view into where we see the market in our perspective in this industry of innovation, entrepreneurship, ecosystem development. So as next steps and recommendations is really to discover, to understand the strategies, foundations towards the data-driven innovation, experiment, so really start learning by doing. So getting started with the lowest risk and public data information to start understanding what type of ecosystem level user experiences we can cater. And then, of course, there's always the plan to build a common vision and define and develop further as the ecosystem actors together towards the taking more challenging use cases and liabilities on to manage the ecosystem information. And from there forward, it's gradually learn, do, and iterate further. So as conclusions, it's really about driving economic growth through innovation. Entrepreneurship requires the data-driven decision-making. It needs to be a holistic understanding of the ecosystem's needs for development and improvement, and really make the entrepreneur data-centric design. Using modular architectures, open source solutions to avoid vendor locks, to control your ecosystem under your own terms, open standard, open source, to enable transparency, not only in the system architectures, but also in the software code level, and to be able to include any providers to improve that system. And then ultimately to really start with the least risky information to improve the quality and the volume. So to really kind of come to key conclusion is that you really need to get started to start learning. So these things will never ever start to get more sense or clarity in a theoretical thinking or talking about them. So this is basically kind of the most simple way we can kind of put this forward, is that we all have learned to do many things in our life and understand things that seem magical. So the theory of bicycle, when we look at the specifications and capabilities and so forth, and we look others riding the bike, it's hard to imagine how it all works. But the only way to really start learning is to jump on the bike and start pedaling, and it's impossible to learn in theory and through this lens. So practice makes perfect, and the more we practice and do things for real, the more our capabilities improve, and the more we understand how these things work in practice and what can we do next. So the conclusion is really need to get started to start learning. And yeah, so we'll open the Q&A session here next. So I'll pass on to you, Oscar, now.
Yes, thank you, Valto. So if you have any questions, feel free to basically to type it here in the chat. So one question from Avnit. So it's that what's the main target group for the EcosystemOS? So basically, as we said in the beginning, within the startup ecosystem environment, so there are multiple actors, but the main that this solution is targeted is basically for economic development agencies and alike. So any kind of player that has the mandate to basically to look after the whole ecosystem. So looking at the development of the whole ecosystem, and because what we are basically trying to communicate is that this is essentially an infrastructure, so similar to roads or water pipeline systems or energy or telecommunications. Infrastructures in general are serving for basically general purposes. So we are bringing here an infrastructure that is specifically designed to basically to generate more innovations faster in any specific territories, to provide the kind of intelligence that the ecosystem operator or the economic development agency needs to basically to make smarter decisions to support innovation and entrepreneurship in general. So that's basically the target group that we are targeting. Of course, once you have data, then and you have insights and you have like more clarity about what's happening at ecosystem level, so then information can be shared with related actors, again, to entrepreneurs, to investors, to support organizations, to media, to any actor that is involved in the game. So we have another question from Avnit. So what challenges in the startup ecosystem will the EcosystemOS identify once you have put in all the data? So would you like to take this one, Valto?
Yes, sure. So basically, the key thing here to really think enabling this is that one of the key things that when we move to developing at ecosystem level is that also the visibility and understanding of what are the needs on the ground level gets very difficult to achieve. So most of the economic development level actors, or then let's say the economic director, or those who have the access to budgets or need to make decisions on resources available to support organizations and so forth. Basically, they don't have direct visibility of what are the real needs of our entrepreneurs. It always comes through a channel, typically the same source that is being granted funds to operate. But nevertheless, it's very limited and sometimes biased view. But for example, with simply starting by implementing the Wisdom AI and putting in place a simple chat interface to be able to allow entrepreneurs or mentors or investors to ask questions about the ecosystem in question, not only is their ability to be able to provide them with the answers, assuming that the data or knowledge have been made available, but when we look at from the scenario that what if there is no knowledge or information available about what they're asking, that actually that exact thing becomes knowledge for what should be made available. So the questions are actually providing the answers of what the ecosystem needs are. So for the most part, that information is very easy to update and make available. But nevertheless, then there's also ability to form patterns about those questions being asked. What are the most common questions by entrepreneurs? What are the most common questions about these actors and that actors? And then from that perspective, then it's also possible to think what other use cases or other more advanced approaches than just providing that information should we enable. So really the first and foremost important aspect of that is that this type of information and knowledge is not available for those who try to improve the conditions of the ecosystem. So the starting point is to start understanding the needs from the development aspect. And then when you know the needs, of course, it's way easier to cater for those needs and know where to invest or how to develop than without having those needs constantly being fed into. Then it's from there you can prioritize the needs, you can budget, you can do many different things. So that's really the starting point.
Thanks, Avnit, for the questions. Any other questions?
I think there was one startup founders, ecosystem actors. So yes, very much. So when we say ecosystem actors, it includes founders, talent, becoming founders, additional team members, mentors, advisors, those who help startups, entrepreneurs, as well as then support services personnel that provide events or other advisory services through an organization setting, and so forth.
So we have another question. So do you have an ecosystem right now that has fully implemented the EcosystemOS? So the reply is no, for obvious reasons. So basically, as we said in the beginning of the presentation, we have just launched EcosystemOS in the first quarter of this year, and also building that kind of interconnected and interoperable solution for an ecosystem is not one thing that you can do once and that's it. It's like an ongoing work in progress, basically to start unlocking data and start unlocking different use cases that are relevant for your ecosystem. So we have, of course, started, as Balto said, by the end of the presentation, we have been activating this approach in 4 or 5 different ecosystems in North America, also in Africa, in Malaysia, and also here in Europe. But they are in a very early stage, so basically meaning that we are helping them to define the requirements. We are helping them to define what is the most priority use case for them to get started with this journey. And then I would say that more towards the end of this year, we will have more cases that can be shown more, I would say, visually, if that makes sense.
I'm taking here also another question, which is any comment about the ownership of the system. So we are, I would say, one of the unique actors in this space that we always seek when it comes to data. So the information shared, we always start from a position that data should always belong to the rightful owner, which basically means where does that data comes from. So if that is the right aspect to think of the data. Then when it's made available to ecosystem level to others, that data is basically just managed for the perspective of the rightful owner. And then it of course, when it's data, it's multipliable for no additional cost. So it can be, the owner can decide you can freely use it for however you like, or it can be said you can only use it this way for this purpose, for showing it to these actors. So that's why it's important to those rules need to have a party to agree with, so that it can be made, that information or data can be made scalably available. So that's from the data aspect. And another key aspect is the software itself. So the software, whether it's infrastructure, backend software, AI, any of these aspects, we work primarily with open source. So open source means that data can be, but software can be collaboratively developed. It can be forked and adapted to your own use, and you are in full control of that software. And then you can choose to collaborate and share the developments of that software with other actors, meaning the other ecosystems, with us and so forth. So that's majority of the applications code. And then when it comes to infrastructure that is implemented and operational, so the systems in place, has then agreement. So we can offer software as a service starting point, which basically means that we take the liability and responsibility of managing the system and operating it for your ecosystem. And the benefit of that is that you don't need to have technical capabilities to the level of managing software and infrastructure, nor you don't need to have budgets at that level. But we also offered in the ultimate plan the other option where you fully are ownership of the operating the whole system with your own resources and people locally, either your organization or subcontractors locally. And we basically provide advisory and only connectivity between the global connectivity with other ecosystems and so forth. And this whole journey through a roadmap can be done in phases, where you can start with fully hosted solution that ultimately then becomes fully your ownership at all levels when you have such capabilities. And also in the cases, for example, where you may start with project-based funding, so you don't have permanent funding for the system, but you still like to start from an ownership position for the whole system, with the hopes that you can get continuum funding to operate. But then for some reason, the funding doesn't get secured. You can also downgrade to the software as a service level, where we take on the responsibility, and then that reduces the cost and ability to maintain the system. But in that case, also some of the use cases may have to be limited, because basically we don't want and we don't feel it's the right way that some global actor, any global actor anywhere in the world, would be responsible of sensitive data from any country's citizens' private information. But that's why these all are dynamically adjustable depending on the current resources and capabilities and starting point. But ultimately, we want to see all local ecosystems in full ownership and control of their architectures in all levels, without any vendor locks.
Thank you, Jaime, for your question. Any other questions? We are a little bit over the time that we scheduled for today, but we are more than happy to continue responding those questions, because we understand that are very, very relevant to basically to get clear understanding about the solution. So, but if no more questions, so then maybe we can. Okay. Munsungu, you have one question, right?
Yes, hello. Can I be heard?
Feel free to type it, please.
Okay. So do I speak or do I type it? Sorry.
Or you can also voice it out if you have mic there.
Oh, okay. I literally it won't be long. Just a quick question. So, in terms of the development of an entrepreneurial ecosystem, and kind of based on the barriers that were identified, I guess my question would be, how can AI, machine learning, how can all these different technologies be used to mitigate those existing barriers for entrepreneurs? And I speak from a place where, in a lot of ways, the barriers are pretty constant, and I'm trying to figure out if with this platform that's been recently created, can it help to mitigate and reduce those barriers for entrepreneurs to effectively navigate an entrepreneurial ecosystem, whether it be in Europe or whichever part of the world. But I kind of wanted to get your perspective on that front. Thank you.
So yeah, thank you. Very, very good question. So one of the things that it's understandable that AI is also it's maybe the most vague topic, still very new to many. But one of the key things how I want to kind of communicate the benefits of that is that anyone who tries to communicate information to others a lot, so basically all of us in many roles, in our private roles and specifically in professional roles, we are constantly trying to explain things to other people. We here currently at the moment, of course. What AI helps to do specifically is that you only need to feed the knowledge in one way, in one format. And basically it acts similar as humans act, in that once it has understood the information, it can constantly explain it in many different ways, even in different languages. So for example, between languages, it doesn't do translations. It's actually doing like a human interpreter does, that once I understand something in English, I can fluently explain it in Finnish if I know the language. But not only that, you can also ask the AI to explain it. Can you explain it in more simple terms? Can you explain it using some analogies? Can you help me to understand this more in this context? And what it does is it uses the exact same knowledge, but tries to just communicate it in different ways. And it does that tirelessly. So it's always available. You can communicate it to it with voice. So in a way, we humans have different ways of how we are easiest to understand information. And all of these come with the benefit of AI without needing to generate multiple different language versions of our knowledge, or multiple different, make an executive summary out of that. You don't need to generate that separately. You can have like a long research document and you can say, okay, can you explain me this whole document in an executive summary format? And it can do that. So these are really the superpowers that these new large language models bring to the plate. But it can only answer to questions that it has specifically provided the information about. And this is exactly where the ecosystem information management comes at the front and center. That otherwise it will just if you ask ChatGPT, it will answer whatever it picked online, however it did that. But when you provide it with specific and knowledge, it will stay in local context. It will communicate about only local things in a local, accurate information, if it has been provided with that. And this is really the key, that the poor data means poor AI. But it's same for us humans, yes.
No, absolutely. Thank you so very much for that context information. It helps a great deal. And I think if I can just ask a quick closing question, what does it take to become, I guess you can say, an entrepreneurial ecosystem developer? If my question is broad or kind of off base, my apologies, but I'm just thinking in terms of what is required in terms of skill sets, capacities, knowledge base, tools, resources. What does it take to become an entrepreneurial ecosystem developer?
You want to take that, Oscar? All right. So of course that is something that I would say that is a skill and discipline that similar to, I would say, UX designers, user experience designers, that there isn't really like a right background or right skill set to start with. The most important thing is the motivation and the willingness to start fixing those problems and then learning along the way, and then building that expertise along the way. But it helps. Like there's a lot of maybe better if you search for ecosystem builder. There's a lot of resources and programs available for that. What we have seen in that discipline is that it really helps if you can secure a job position in an organization that wants to develop and support the ecosystem, and then getting like a role of an ecosystem developer or builder in an organization. But most important thing is like ultimately you are wanting to help entrepreneurs to succeed and innovation to happen. But there are some courses to be applied. We also have Ecosystem Development Academy knowledge resources for that. But that's specifically for that. But then to make an impact happen, unfortunately, it gets to that organizations really need to start coming together, and more of a significant, more sustainable and long-term funding needs to be applied to make these organizational structures. So think of it, doesn't matter how good bridge builder you are not allowed to build a bridge in the city, even if everyone would say we need to have a bridge here. So it needs permits, it needs this, it needs someone to make that the bridge being built complies with all the regulatory things and so forth. So getting more scalable impact, unfortunately, becomes an organizational challenge where more actors need to come together, or then the public sector needs to take a lead initially, like happened in the mobile networks until they became more private organization-led.
Perfect. Thank you so very much. Really appreciate it.
The key here to present, and you can try the demo afterwards on your side for more details. But what we wanted to quickly showcase there, that it has a voice interface and it can also talk in, I think, 150 languages or something like that. And then ultimately the questions or the key there is that the answers, when you are in control of what information it answers based on, that is a key factor for making that a trustful source. So if you can't have the information, know what information it's basing its answers, then you don't have trustful source. But the key here is that the information doesn't need to be at all organized in the same level as is required now when we try to put information to websites and organize it and make it spelled correctly and so forth. So that's all from my side. Thanks.
Thank you, and have a great day. Respect from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.